Something was in the Iranian sky last night that the Iranian air defense system did not recognize, could not identify, and could not ignore. This is not a speculative claim. This is documented through multiple independent data streams that converged in the hours between sunset on May 10th and sunrise on May 11th, 2026. Anti-aircraft gun positions across northwestern Tehran opened fire into the darkness. Not a single battery conducting a scheduled test. Multiple gun emplacements across geographically separated sectors of the capital city, simultaneously engaging unknown targets with the specific urgency of systems that have been told something is overhead and have been given no further information about what it is. The tracer rounds visible in the footage uploaded from ground-level witnesses describe the specific visual signature of anti-aircraft gunfire operating at maximum alert. High-caliber automatic weapons firing sustained bursts into an unseen target environment. The muzzle flashes ripple across multiple positions in the video evidence that has been geolocated to northwestern Tehran districts. Then the same signature appears in Khuzestan province, hundreds of kilometers to the southwest. Same night, same time window, same operational posture. Multiple gun positions across two geographically separated regions of Iran engaging targets simultaneously. Iranian state media announced this morning that they had shot down a drone in southwestern Iran. The announcement did not specify what kind of drone. It did not specify what country of origin. It did not specify what the drone was doing over Iranian territory. It did not specify what specific weapon system achieved the intercept. It specified that Iranian air defenses engaged and destroyed a drone. What is confirmed is that something was operating in Iranian airspace overnight on May 10th that triggered the most visible anti-aircraft response over Iranian cities since this war began. And this morning, May 11th, 2026, a second F-35 squawked 7,700 over the Gulf of Oman. 2 consecutive days, 2 F-35 emergency declarations, both coming from the Strait of Hormuz direction, both squawking the Universal Aviation Emergency Code that announces to every radar facility within range that the aircraft has a problem and requires immediate landing access. 2 days in a row, the same aircraft type, the same general origin vector, the same emergency code. At the same moment that President Trump posted on Truth Social that they will be laughing no longer. The specific sentence that ends a lengthy accounting of 47 years of Iranian strategy against American administrations. The accounting that follows the rejection of Iran's counterproposal as totally unacceptable. The analytical reading of presidential communication on active conflict situations treats this as the specific kind of declarative conclusion that precedes, rather than follows, military action. Stay with me, because May 11th, 2026 has assembled a convergence of simultaneous signals that no longer admits multiple interpretations. Anti-aircraft fire over Tehran, drone shoot-down claims lacking operational specificity, back-to-back F-35 emergencies from the Gulf of Oman, explosions in Shiraz, a building compound destroyed in Iraq, continued strikes on Erbil, Trump's complete rejection of the counterproposal, Iran's taunting institutional response that it does not draft plans to please the American president, an Israeli strike plan submitted to Washington for 1 to 2 weeks of renewed operations, including the targeted assassination of IRGC Commander-in-Chief Ahmad Vahidi and other senior IRGC leadership. All of it points in one direction, with a clarity that the past 33 days of diplomatic maneuvering, the ceasefire attempts, the back-channel communications, the Pakistani intermediaries, the Omani mediation, none of it has previously produced at this level of resolution. The bombing is coming back. The question is no longer whether a resumed strike campaign will occur. That question resolved the moment Trump read the counterproposal and called it totally unacceptable. The only analytical questions remaining are the specific timing and the operational scope, and the signals of the past 24 hours have narrowed both questions substantially. Begin with the anti-aircraft fire. Because what happened over Tehran and Khuzestan overnight tells you specific things about the state of Iran's air defense architecture and the operational activities that are occurring within Iranian airspace even before any resumed American strike campaign is officially announced. Understand the layered structure of what Iran began this conflict with. Iran's air defense architecture was never designed to defeat the United States Air Force in a stand-up aerial engagement. It was designed to create enough cost and complexity that any air operation against Iranian territory would require sustained suppression of enemy air defenses before the main strike packages could operate with acceptable risk. The architecture had tiers. The S-300 PMU-2 batteries, the Russian-supplied long-range surface-to-air missile systems that represented Iran's most capable area defense platform, systems capable of engaging targets at ranges exceeding 200 kilometers and altitudes up to 27 kilometers. The Bavar 373, Iran's domestically produced long-range air defense system that was designed to replicate and in some claims exceed S-300 performance using Iranian-manufactured components and Iranian software integration. The Sayad missile family, medium-range systems providing regional coverage around critical infrastructure nodes, nuclear facilities, military command centers, and urban population centers. The Rad and Tabas systems, shorter-range mobile air defense platforms designed for point defense of high-value assets. And then the bottom tier, the gun-based anti-aircraft systems, the massive automatic weapons that do not require sophisticated radar integration, the systems that can be operated with simpler optical and acoustic targeting methods, the specific residual capability that an air defense network retains after its guided missile systems have been addressed by sustained suppression operations. The S-300 batteries have been substantially degraded by the SAD operations that have been running continuously since February 28th. The operational record shows a systematic engagement pattern, harm missile strikes on emitting radar systems, electronic warfare degradation of command and control networks, kinetic strikes on known battery positions, and the cumulative effect of 73 days of continuous pressure on the most advanced components of Iran's integrated air defense system. What remains of the upper tier is operating at reduced capacity, with degraded radar coverage under communication restrictions that limit coordination between batteries. What remains is the lower tier. And the lower tier was what opened fire over Tehran and Khuzestan last night. Massive machine guns firing high-caliber tracer rounds into the darkness. The engagement profile of a defense network that cannot guide a missile to an intercept point, but can fill a volume of airspace with projectiles in the hope of damaging whatever is passing through it. Multiple gun positions opening up simultaneously over northwestern Tehran and separately in Khuzestan province tells you something important. Simultaneous engagement from geographically separated positions indicates either coordinated reporting through the command network or multiple independent visual or acoustic contacts prompting each position to engage independently. Either interpretation indicates an overhead presence that was widespread and sustained enough to trigger the defensive response across a broad geographic area. Gun systems have short engagement envelopes effective at low altitudes within visual range. The fact that multiple gun positions engage simultaneously suggests low-altitude targets, drone operations at low altitude, cruise missile profiles at terminal phase altitude, or aircraft operating low enough to be within the gun engagement zone. The drone that Iran claims to have shot down in southwestern Iran lacks the specificity that credible after-action reporting contains. But the anti-aircraft activity over multiple regions on the same night is consistent with a drone operation that traversed enough Iranian territory to be detected and engaged across multiple defensive zones. What kind of drone, operating on whose behalf, conducting what mission, remains unconfirmed. The operational context supplies the most probable answer. The 40-day oil storage countdown, the collapsed ceasefire talks, the F-35 ISR missions building the targeting package for the resumed strike, the Israeli strike plan submitted to Washington, the specific sentence in Trump's Truth Social post. That context tells you that any drone operating over Iran on the night of May 10th into May 11th is almost certainly conducting intelligence collection rather than kinetic strike. You build the targeting package before you execute the strike. The drone over Iran overnight was probably building the targeting package. The two back-to-back F-35 emergencies are the development that demands the most careful analytical engagement. Because 2 consecutive days of F-35 emergency declarations from the same operational area cannot both be dismissed as unrelated mechanical coincidences with the same confidence that a single emergency declaration can be characterized as normal operational tempo producing a routine maintenance fault. One emergency in 73 days of continuous operations is unremarkable. The F-35 fleet has been operating at the highest tempo of any American air campaign since the 1991 Gulf War. Sortie generation rates that stress every system on the aircraft. Engine hours accumulated at multiples of peacetime rates. Maintenance cycles compressed to sustain continuous combat operations. In that context, a single aircraft squawking 7700 and diverting for emergency landing is within the expected statistical distribution of mechanical failures. 2 in 48 hours from the same general area changes the analytical question. Because the probability of 2 unrelated mechanical emergencies from the same aircraft type operating in the same region within 48 hours is significantly lower than the probability of a single event. And the operational implications of the 2 events are different depending on which explanation is correct. If both are genuinely mechanical, the question becomes whether there is a common systems fault affecting the F-35 fleet in the theatre that is producing multiple anomalies. A component failure mode appearing across multiple airframes under the stress of sustained combat operations. A maintenance procedure issue at the operating base. A fuel contamination problem affecting multiple aircraft. A software anomaly in the avionics suite triggering emergency warnings across multiple sorties. If both are combat-related, the question becomes whether the operational environment over the Gulf of Oman has changed in a way that is creating conditions that are affecting these aircraft. Electronic warfare effects. Air defense engagement. Collision or near-miss events. The honest analytical position is that 2 mechanical faults in 2 days from aircraft operating at the highest tempo of any American air war since 1991 is within the range of plausible operational stress outcomes. The operational security procedure of going transponder dark on approach to Al Dhafra produces the same disappearance from civilian tracking that Iranian propaganda has been constructing narratives around. The Iranian Consulate General in India posted, "We shot it down again." The exact same template applied to the exact same event type for the second day in a row. Each F-35 emergency produces the same Iranian public response, a claim of engagement, a claim of damage, a claim of Iranian air defense effectiveness. The claims are unsupported by independent evidence. The operational security procedures of the American Theater Command ensure that the aircraft disappear from civilian tracking before landing, which prevents independent verification of the aircraft's condition upon arrival. The propaganda machine exploits this information gap to construct its narrative. 2 emergency declarations in 2 days from the same area is a data pattern that requires more information before it can be dismissed as conclusively mechanical rather than combat-related. The timing coincides with anti-aircraft fire over Tehran and Khuzestan, the drone shoot-down claim, and Trump's rejection. The timing makes the mechanical coincidence explanation harder to maintain, with each additional data point that aligns in the same temporal window. The F-35 is the most advanced combat aircraft ever built, operating under the most demanding conditions of any American combat aviation campaign in decades. The maintenance anomalies that emerge under these conditions tell you something about the operational tempo that the Theatre Command is maintaining. An operational tempo that produces this rate of anomalies is the tempo of an air campaign building toward a major operational phase, not the tempo of an air campaign that is winding down. The explosions in Shiraz overnight are the ground-level manifestation of the covert operations dimension of this conflict, the dimension that has been building its operational record since before the war officially began. A single blast in Shiraz, described by an eyewitness as one blast but very strong, a building compound whose occupants have not been confirmed in the available reporting. The Fars news agency reporting that a building in Iraq, Iran, was completely destroyed. The specific targeting logic that has characterized the pre-war and ceasefire period strikes on Iranian government-linked infrastructure. Trace this pattern back to its origin. In the months leading up to the war's February 28th opening, there was a series of explosions at IRGC-linked facilities across Iran. The Karaj facility strike, the Natanz centrifuge component plant damage, the destruction of the uranium metal production facility in Isfahan, the drone strike on the IRGC command building in Kermanshah, the explosions at the Parchin military complex. Each of these events was characterized by Iranian authorities as an accident, a gas leak, a construction incident, or an industrial malfunction. Each of these events was assessed by Western intelligence sources as an Israeli or American covert operation. The pattern continued throughout the ceasefire period. Explosions at facilities that the Iranian government could not acknowledge had been struck because acknowledging the strikes would reveal the vulnerability of the facilities and the inadequacy of the defenses protecting them. The number of incidents that Iranian authorities have characterized as gas leaks throughout this conflict now strains any credible mechanical failure explanation. A gas leak does not produce a building compound completely destroyed in the manner that the Fars news agency described. A gas leak does not produce the specific signature of a precision strike. The explosions in Shiraz and Iraq overnight fit the same targeting logic that has governed the covert operations dimension throughout the conflict. Facilities associated with the IRGC's command structure, its technical programs, its leadership continuity, are being eliminated in ways that maintain deniability below the threshold of acknowledged military action. The specific significance of Iraq in the operational context of May 11th cannot be overstated. Iraq is the location of the IR-40 heavy water reactor, a facility that has been under international scrutiny since its construction because heavy water reactors produce plutonium as a byproduct that can be separated and used for nuclear weapons production. The IR-40 was modified under the 2015 Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action to prevent weapons-grade plutonium production. The modification involved removing the reactor's core and filling it with concrete to prevent operation. The modification was reversible. The IR-40 remains a nuclear facility whose operational status and infrastructure are directly relevant to Iran's weapons program trajectory. A building compound destroyed in Iraq in the operational context of collapsed ceasefire talks, an Israeli strike plan submitted to Washington, and Trump's totally unacceptable rejection of the Iranian counterproposal is a compound in a location that the operational picture places at the intersection of covert pressure and strike preparation. The Erbil strikes that occurred simultaneously are the development that the Iranian military's operational command apparently calculated would produce American hesitation and Kurdish political complications. Instead, those strikes have produced the specific regional dynamic of continued attacks on a location where American forces are present, where Kurdish regional authority is headquartered, and where the Iraqi government's response to Iranian strikes on Iraqi sovereign territory continues to be inadequate from the perspective of every American ally in the region who is watching Iran violate Iraqi sovereignty with impunity. Erbil was struck in the sneak attack drone operation described in prior reporting. Erbil has been struck again today. The pattern of continued attacks on the same location is the operational behavior of an IRGC regional command structure operating under the decentralized core autonomy model that allows local commanders to authorize engagements without central command approval. This decentralized model is producing a cumulative record of Iranian military action against a location where American forces and the key regional partner are present. A record that makes the resumed strike authorization easier from the administration's perspective, not harder. Each additional strike on Erbil is another entry in the ledger of Iranian aggression that the administration's legal and political justification for resumed operations will cite. The Iranian counter-proposal, in its complete form, is the document whose content explains why President Trump called it totally unacceptable. Understanding why requires examining what the proposal demanded. Total ending of the blockade. The economic instrument that is costing the Iranian regime approximately $500 million per day. The instrument that has 70-plus tankers blocked from loading Iranian crude. The instrument that is 40 days from producing the storage overflow that permanently closes some oil wells because the produced crude has nowhere to go. The economic pressure that has collapsed the Iranian rial to record lows. The inflation rate that has pushed basic food prices beyond the reach of ordinary Iranians. The blockade is the single most effective instrument of American pressure in this conflict. Iran demanded its total elimination as a precondition for any further negotiation. Freedom to move oil. The specific commercial freedom that the blockade's enforcement mechanism, the disabled tankers, the blocked vessels, the insurance restrictions, the shipping route monitoring, is preventing. Iran demanded that the United States cease all interference with Iranian oil shipments as a condition of negotiation. Ceasefire in Lebanon. Recognition that Hezbollah, whose funding has been cut by the IRGC's financial collapse, whose operational capability has been degraded by Israeli military pressure that has been relentless throughout the conflict, needs relief. Iran demanded that the United States compel Israel to cease operations against Hezbollah as a condition of Iranian negotiation. Removal of all American sanctions. Not the modification of sanctions, not the waiver of specific sanctions, the total removal of the entire 40-year economic architecture that has been the foundation of American pressure on the Iranian program. The architecture that the Treasury Department's Office of Foreign Assets Control has spent decades building, refining, and enforcing. The architecture that Operation Economic Fury has expanded and intensified. Iran demanded its complete dismantlement. Complete Iranian control of the Strait of Hormuz. The demand that violates international law. The demand that every maritime nation in the world has a direct interest in rejecting. The Strait of Hormuz is an international waterway. No single nation controls it under international law. Iran demanded exclusive control. Return of all frozen assets. The decades of IRGC funds that the UAE Banking Cooperation and the Treasury's Operation Economic Fury have trapped, frozen, and preserved for the Iranian people on the other side of this conflict. The assets that represent the accumulated wealth of the IRGC's economic empire. Iran demanded their immediate return. These demands are not a negotiating position from which movement toward American requirements is possible through creative diplomatic drafting. They are the institutional requirements of an organization that cannot accept the terms that resolve the conflict, because accepting those terms would dissolve the IRGC's strategic rationale for existing. The IRGC is not a military organization that happens to be engaged in a conflict with the United States. The IRGC is an institution whose entire structure, whose economic empire, whose political power, whose reason for existing is predicated on the conflict with the United States. A peace agreement that ends the conflict dissolves the IRGC's institutional purpose. The IRGC cannot accept such an agreement. The IRGC can only delay, obstruct, and demand terms that no American administration could accept, so that the IRGC can tell its domestic audience that it fought for Iranian interests and was betrayed by American intransigence. That is what the counter-proposal is, not a negotiation. A performance for the domestic audience that the information blackout has isolated from the operational record of this conflict. You cannot show the Iranian population a peace proposal that begins from the acknowledgement that the IRGC has lost the conflict. You show them a proposal that demands everything and concedes nothing. Your propaganda machine then presents that proposal as evidence of continued strength, as evidence that Iran negotiated from a position of power, as evidence that it was the Americans who refused a reasonable settlement. The proposal's rejection was certain before it was submitted. The domestically necessary performance required that it be submitted anyway. Trump's response. I have just read the response from Iran's so-called representatives. I don't like it. Totally unacceptable. That is the specific register of someone who was not surprised by the content of the proposal. The totally unacceptable characterization is not the surprise of a diplomat who expected a different outcome. It is the confirmation of a president who has been saying all along that the only way this ends is one way or the other. The Secretary of State has been saying the American position consistently throughout this conflict. The uranium will be addressed through agreement or through force. The totally unacceptable counterproposal has resolved it to the other option. The question is no longer whether the military option will be activated. The question is when, at what scale, and against what target set. Trump's Truth Social post of May 11th is worth reading as the specific kind of presidential communication that precedes military action rather than follows it. Let us examine the structure of that post carefully, because the structure itself communicates operational intent. The post begins with a historical accounting. 47 years of Iranian games. The specific reference to the Obama administration's cash transfers, hundreds of billions of dollars. The $1.7 billion in physical currency. The emptied bank accounts in DC and Virginia and Maryland. The suitcases and satchels of money flown to Tehran, the Iranian reaction of disbelief at the scale of the transfer. The Post then catalogues the Biden administration's failures in dealing with Iran, the roadside bombs that killed American service members, the 42,000 protesters killed by the Iranian regime during the 2022 uprising, the enrichment advances that brought Iran closer to weapons capability than at any point in the program's history. The pattern of American concessions producing Iranian escalation. The Post then arrives at its conclusion, the specific sentence that ends the accounting. They will be laughing no longer. Presidential Truth Social posts about active military adversaries do not end with that as a diplomatic assessment. They end with it as the declarative transition between one operational phase and the next. Every previous Truth Social post in this conflict that described the bombing restarting at a higher level and intensity was followed within days by the operational actions that the post preceded. This is a documented pattern of correlation between presidential communication and subsequent military action that the analytical community has been tracking throughout this conflict. The totally unacceptable characterization and the "they will be laughing no longer" conclusion are operating in the same temporal and operational register as those prior posts. The analytical community that has been tracking the relationship between Trump's social media declarations and the subsequent operational actions has a dataset that tells it what follows. Iran's official response to the rejection reveals the institutional mindset that is driving the IRGC's decision-making. It doesn't matter at all. No one in Iran drafts plans to please Trump. The institutional insolence of a regime that does not understand or cannot afford to acknowledge what it is taunting. The most powerful military in the world, led by a president who has demonstrated throughout this conflict that he will use military force when diplomatic alternatives are exhausted. A president who has posted on Truth Social that the bombing will resume at a much higher level and intensity. A president who has just described 47 years of Iranian games and concluded they will be laughing no longer. The taunt is the domestic information operation again. The Consulate General in India who posted, "We shot it down." The state media response that Iranian plans are not drafted to please Trump. Both are communications targeted at the domestic audience that the information blackout has isolated from the operational record of 73 days. Outside Iran's information blackout, outside the censorship, outside the propaganda framework that prevents Iranians from accessing independent news sources, the taunt is read against a very different background. The background of the MV Ocean Trader operating in the Indian Ocean. The background of F-35 ISR missions building the targeting package. The background of an Israeli strike plan on Washington's desk. The background of a 40-day oil storage countdown that is approaching its terminal point. The background of anti-aircraft guns firing over Tehran at targets the gunners could not identify. That is the background against which the world reads, "No one in Iran drafts plans to please Trump," and the world reaches a different conclusion than the IRGC's domestic propaganda operation intends. The Israeli strike plan submitted to Washington transforms the resumed bombing from an American bilateral action into the coordinated American-Israeli operational architecture that Epic Fury represented. 1 to 2 weeks of sustained strikes, with possible extension. This is not a punitive raid. It is a campaign designed to achieve specific effects across a broad target set of Iranian military and nuclear infrastructure. The specific targeting of IRGC Commander-in-Chief Ahmad Vahidi and other senior commanders transforms the operational character. Not just infrastructure degradation, but the simultaneous physical elimination of the institutional leadership. An urgent Netanyahu call to discuss the substance and timing, reconciling Israeli strike plan parameters with American operational planning. Ahmad Vahidi is the IRGC's commander-in-chief, the individual at the apex of the Revolutionary Guard's hierarchy. His targeting would be the most significant strike on Iranian leadership since the previous command structure was killed. Understanding Vahidi's role requires understanding the IRGC's command structure. It is a political military institution with parallel structures for ground, aerospace, naval, Quds Force and Besiege forces. The Commander-in-Chief integrates these parallel structures into a coherent operational response, translating strategic direction from the Supreme Leader into operational orders for component forces. He adjudicates between competing IRGC factions and manages the relationship with the regular military, whose conscript forces have been used as cannon fodder to preserve IRGC capability. Targeting the Commander-in-Chief is the decapitation option. It removes the coordinator of Iran's remaining military capability and produces command confusion that makes every other objective easier to achieve. The Netanyahu call, flagged as urgent, operates within the Epic Fury coordination architecture. The resumed strikes add leadership targeting, transforming infrastructure degradation into a simultaneous decapitation campaign. The call is urgent because the window for targeting Vahidi is narrowing. The operational intelligence has a shelf life, and every day of delay increases the probability he changes his security procedures. The urgency also reflects that the collapse of negotiations has opened the window of maximum American domestic support. The diplomatic path is exhausted. The window for resumed operations is open. Mujtaba Khamenei's status is the structural impediment to any negotiated resolution that is not the military outcome. The Supreme Leader is the institutional apex of Iranian governance, the specific authority whose approval any agreement must receive for the Iranian system to treat it as binding. Netanyahu's 60 Minutes characterization. In a bunker or secret location, trying to preserve authority he doesn't have at the level his father had. The Israeli Prime Minister's public assessment of the Iranian leadership's condition, delivered to a global audience in the same week that the Israeli strike plan has been submitted to Washington. The description does double duty. It informs the international public about the structural impediment to a negotiated resolution, and it tells Mujtaba Khamenei that his location and condition are being discussed publicly by the leader of the country that has been executing operations against Iran since February 28th. The specific characterization that Mujtaba doesn't have the authority his father had is the analytical point that explains the Artesh cannon fodder situation. The IRGC's decentralized operational decision-making. The failure of Iranian diplomatic communications to produce a coherent counter-proposal. The specific fractured command structure that has been producing simultaneous, contradictory signals throughout this conflict. Hardline IRGC aerospace commanders declaring missiles locked and ready, while pragmatist diplomats submit proposals through Pakistani intermediaries. The IRGC seizing Chinese tankers while the Foreign Ministry pleads for Chinese diplomatic support. The multi-front pre-dawn attacks on UAE and Kuwait, while the Foreign Ministry posts that no one in Iran drafts plans to please Trump. An institution without a functioning Supreme Leader is an institution operating in the specific kind of institutional paralysis that produces exactly these contradictions. Every faction doing what its own calculation says serves its interests, without the central authority that would impose coherence on the institutional response. The Supreme Leader, when functioning, serves as the adjudicator of last resort, the individual whose authority is accepted by all factions within the Iranian system, the individual who can impose strategic coherence on a fractious institutional landscape. Without that individual functioning, each faction pursues its own agenda. Vahidi's elimination, if the Israeli plan is executed, removes the institutional center of the IRGC's command structure, in the context where the Supreme Leader's incapacitation has already removed the political authority that would normally adjudicate between IRGC factions. Vahidi plus Mujtaba, unavailable, plus the accumulated physical destruction of the conflict's past 73 days, equals the specific institutional vacuum that the American and Israeli operational planning has been building toward. Not just military defeat. The specific combination of military defeat and command decapitation that produces the institutional collapse from which recovery is measured in years rather than months. The Artesh soldiers who went to die with 10 bullets each are the human manifestation of this institutional fracture. The regular Iranian military, the Artesh, has been used as cannon fodder throughout this conflict. Conscript soldiers sent into combat with inadequate ammunition, inadequate equipment, inadequate training, inadequate support. The IRGC has preserved its own conventional capability by sacrificing the Artesh. The Artesh soldiers know this. Their families know this. The information blackout tries to prevent this knowledge from spreading, but it spreads anyway through the informal networks that always penetrate information controls. The Artesh soldiers, who were given 10 bullets each and told to die for the Supreme Leader, are now calculating whether the Supreme Leader is even alive to receive their sacrifice. That calculation is spreading through the Artesh ranks, and it is producing the specific kind of morale collapse that precedes institutional disintegration. The complete operational picture of May 11, 2026 is therefore not the picture of a conflict entering a diplomatic phase of resolution. It is the picture of a conflict entering the final operational phase that the diplomatic phase failed to produce through agreement. The anti-aircraft fire over Tehran is the symptom of a defender that knows something is in the air and cannot identify it precisely. The ISR operations building the targeting package are using the stealth and passive collection architecture that Iran's gun-based residual defences cannot reliably detect. The F-35 squadrons operating from Al Dhafra and the carriers in the Gulf of Oman are conducting collection missions that Iran's degraded S-300 network cannot track, and that Iran's gun-based systems can only engage at the low-altitude terminal phase of the collection profile. The guns were shooting at something last night. The targeting package they were trying to stop is already mostly built. The two F-35 emergencies are the operational tempo signature of aircraft being run at maximum frequency through the highest intensity air war environment since the Cold War. The sortie generation rates required to build the targeting package are producing the maintenance anomalies that emergency declarations represent. The explosions in Shiraz and Iraq and the continued strikes on Erbil are the multi-vector pressure that the covert operations and regional militia dimensions are adding to the military and economic pressure simultaneously. The covert dimension eliminates facilities that the overt dimension will not need to strike because they have already been destroyed. The regional dimension creates the record of Iranian aggression that justifies the overt dimension's expansion. The totally unacceptable rejection and the "they will be laughing no longer" post are the presidential communications that precede operational authorization. The historical pattern of this conflict is clear. Trump posts, the bombing follows. The Israeli strike plan with the Vahidi targeting is the operational architecture that the resumed bombing will be executed within. 1 to 2 weeks of strikes targeting the IRGC's command structure and infrastructure. The decapitation of the institution coordinating Iranian resistance throughout the conflict, the 40-day oil storage clock, and the institutional paralysis at the top of the Iranian power structure are the conditions that make the resumed campaign's timeline not a question of whether, but of when. The oil storage is approaching its capacity. When the storage is full, the wells must be shut in, causing permanent damage to the reservoir that reduces ultimate recovery. The IRGC taunting the president who just called their proposal totally unacceptable. the drone that Iranian anti-aircraft fire was shooting at over Tehran last night, the F-35 emergencies from the Gulf of Oman this morning, the explosions in Shiraz in Iraq and Erbil, the Netanyahu urgent call about the strike plan's timing. May 11th is the day the convergence became visible enough that the only remaining question is timing. Netanyahu's urgent call is about the substance and coordination. The F-35 ISR missions have been building the targeting package. The MV Ocean Trader is in the Indian Ocean. Space Force is watching Isfahan at badge number precision. The blockade has 70+ tankers blocked. The oil storage is 40 days from overflow. The Artesh soldiers who went to die with 10 bullets are calculating their loyalty. The IRGC's commander-in-chief has been named in an Israeli targeting plan that is on Washington's desk today. And Iran's official response to all of this: it doesn't matter at all. The timeline is being measured not in months or weeks, but in the specific interval between the Israeli plan arriving on Washington's desk, the operational coordination being completed through the Netanyahu call, and the first aircraft launching from the carriers in the Gulf of Oman and the land bases in the Gulf that have been operational throughout this conflict. The anti-aircraft guns over Tehran were shooting at something last night. The targeting package they were trying to stop is already mostly built, and "they will be laughing no longer" is not a rhetorical flourish. It is the operational announcement of the next phase. Stated publicly in the register that Trump has been using to announce operational phases throughout this conflict. And that has been followed by the announced action every time it has been used. Consider the dataset. Every previous post that described the bombing restarting at a higher level and intensity was followed within days by the operational actions that the post preceded. This is not a theory. This is a documented pattern of presidential communication and subsequent military action. The totally unacceptable characterization and the "they will be laughing no longer" conclusion are operating in the same temporal and operational register. The diplomatic phase has concluded with the rejection of a counter-proposal that was designed to be rejected, because the IRGC cannot accept a peace that dissolves its reason for existing. The military phase is the only remaining option. The only question is the precise timing. The signals of the past 24 hours tell you that the timing is imminent. The anti-aircraft fire over Tehran tells you that ISR collection is already underway. The F-35 emergencies tell you that the collection tempo is at maximum. The explosions in Shiraz and Iraq and Erbil tell you that the covert pressure is continuing. The Israeli strike plan on Washington's desk tells you that the operational architecture is ready. The Netanyahu urgent call tells you that the coordination is being finalized. The 40-day oil storage clock tells you that the window is narrowing. And the "they will be laughing no longer" post tells you that the decision has been made. The bombing is coming back. The 33 days of diplomatic maneuvering, the ceasefire attempts that collapsed, the back-channel communications that went nowhere, the Pakistani intermediaries who carried proposals that could not be accepted, the Omani mediation that could not bridge the gap, all of it is over. The counter-proposal was submitted and rejected. The totally unacceptable has been declared. The "they will be laughing no longer" has been posted. The next phase is the military phase, and the military phase will be different from what preceded it. The opening phase of Epic Fury was designed to establish air superiority, degrade Iran's air defense architecture, and begin the systematic targeting of Iran's military infrastructure. The resumed phase will be designed to achieve the objectives that the opening phase was preparing: the elimination of Iran's nuclear program, the decapitation of the IRGC's command structure, and the creation of the conditions for the institutional collapse that will allow the Iranian people to determine their own future without the IRGC's domination. The Vahidi targeting is the key. Remove the Commander-in-Chief, and the IRGC's ability to coordinate a coherent response to the resumed campaign is fundamentally degraded. The decentralized faction structure that has been producing contradictory signals throughout the ceasefire period becomes the dominant operational reality. Each IRGC faction fights for its own survival rather than for a coordinated strategic objective. The Artesh, already demoralized by being used as cannon fodder, faces the choice between continued sacrifice for an IRGC that no longer has a functioning command structure and the cessation of resistance. The Supreme Leader, reportedly incapacitated and in hiding, cannot impose strategic coherence. The institutional vacuum that has been building throughout this conflict reaches its terminal point. The question that the next 48 to 72 hours will answer is not whether the resumed bombing will begin. That question has been answered by the convergence of signals on May 11th. The question is the precise moment of launch. The fighter aircraft that will execute the first strikes are already on the decks of the carriers in the Gulf of Oman. The bombers that will deliver the heavy ordnance are already at the land bases in the Gulf. The ISR aircraft that have been building the targeting package have already completed their collection missions. The targeting data has already been processed and loaded into the mission planning systems. The operational authorization is the only remaining variable. And the operational authorization is what the "they will be laughing no longer" post signals is imminent. The guns over Tehran were shooting at something last night. The drones are still building the targeting package. The Israeli plan is on the desk, and the 40 days are running. The analytical picture of May 11th, 2026 is the clearest it has been at any point in this conflict. The convergence of military, diplomatic, economic and communication signals has produced a resolution that admits only one reading. The bombing is coming back. The question is when, and the signals say soon.